what if I told you that the absolute hardest working, most passionate, and completely exhausted teams, are, well, they're probably the ones accomplishing absolutely nothing.
Yeah, that is a tough pill to swallow right out of the gate.
It really is. But think about it for a second. You are likely part of an organization right now, or maybe it's a volunteer group, a local community board, or just some passion project you pour all your weekends into.
Right, the kind of thing where the group chat is just constantly pinging at all hours.
Exactly. The calendar is basically a wall-to-wall Tetris game of, events and meetings and endless fundraisers, and everyone involved is just running around at top speed.
Completely drained, usually fueled by too much caffeine and, well, an abundance of good intentions.
Yes, tons of good intentions. There's this constant electric buzz of activity in the room. But then, and this is the scary part, you take a step back during a rare, quiet moment, maybe on a Sunday evening, and you realize something terrifying.
You realize that the needle hasn't actually moved.
Not a millimeter. Despite all the sweat, despite those late night emails, you're just spinning your wheels. The underlying problem you actually set out to solve remains exactly the same as it was 3 years ago.
It is a devastating realization. You look around at all this motion, all this sincere, heartfelt effort, and you have to confront the reality that your community or whoever you're trying to help isn't actually better off.
The impact is just negligible.
Right. But the culture of the group is such that everyone is far too tired and frankly too emotionally invested to even pause and ask why. You find yourself trapped in this system where the sheer volume of effort has become the primary metric for success.
Oh, that's such a trap. It entirely eclipses the actual results. And that exhaustion, that specific brand of tired where you feel like you're doing something noble but getting absolutely nowhere, is the perfect setup for today.
It really is the core of what we're looking at.
We are taking a deep dive into an incredibly insightful set of source materials today. It's all centered around a framework of why most missions, ministries, and passion-driven projects fundamentally fail to work.
And, I think it's important to clarify something for you right away. If you aren't leading a religious charity or a church program, you might be thinking, does this even apply to me?
Oh, please stay with us. Because while the poor text looks at religious and missions organizations, what we're really peeling back the layers on here is universal. It's a masterclass in organizational psychology, systems thinking, and the diffusion of responsibility.
Exactly. The mission of our deep dive today is to explore that incredibly dangerous and often totally invisible gap between motion and impact.
Yeah, motion versus impact, that's the real battle.
It is. What we have here is this phenomenal, almost surgical critique of how human beings organize themselves around a heartfelt burden. And that applies to absolutely anyone trying to build something that matters.
So if you're a startup founder trying to change an industry, or a nonprofit director, or just someone trying to manage your own, scattered philanthropic passions, this is for you.
Right. It's about how to turn a genuine desire to help into a sustainable, effective reality. It really is a deep exploration into the mechanics of stewardship.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the material comes out swinging with a thesis that, honestly, it just stopped me in my tracks.
Oh, the claim about why these projects actually fail.
Yes, it claims that most of these passion-driven projects do not fail because people don't care. I mean, the cynical view is always that people are just selfish or apathetic, right?
Right. We always jump to apathy as the culprit.
But the reality presented here is that people actually care deeply. They care to the point of complete burnout. They fail because caring is not the same as accomplishing.
That is the uncomfortable truth we are forced to confront today. Caring does not equal accomplishing. Activity creates the appearance of progress, but it guarantees zero impact.
It's just wild. We have this deep-seated, deeply human tendency to measure our faithfulness or our dedication to a cause by our level of busyness.
Yes, the calendar test.
Yeah.
If the calendar is full, if announcements are happening, if the budget is being spent, we naturally assume we're succeeding.
We conflate the feeling of exertion with the reality of achievement. It makes me think of running on a treadmill in a pitch black room.
Oh, that's a great visual.
Right. If you've ever done a hard sprint on a treadmill, you know those physical sensations. You're sweating profusely, your heart rate is absolutely through the roof.
Your muscles are burning, the endorphins are going off.
Exactly. You have this intense, undeniable physical sensation of conquering the world, of covering miles of difficult terrain. But then someone flips the lights on.
And you realize you haven't moved an inch.
You are in the exact same spot you were an hour ago. You've just exhausted yourself in place.
That visual perfectly captures what we're looking at. And there is a brilliant, haunting phrase the source uses to describe this exact phenomenon. They call it exhaustion that feels holy.
Wow. Holy exhaustion. That phrase is just so sticky. It really forces you to look at your own motives, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
But why do we fall into that trap? Like, what is the psychological mechanism that makes us crave that dark room treadmill?
Well, to understand holy exhaustion, we have to look at how good intentions gather momentum. You see, good intentions are intoxicating.
They really are. It feels so good to mean well.
Right. When someone presents a real, tangible need to a group of caring people, let's say it's a natural disaster or a struggling neighborhood or a sudden crisis, the immediate response is, we must do something right now.
And that emotional urgency is completely valid. In fact, it's essential, isn't it?
It is. It's usually the spark that launches any noble project. But the danger is that this urgency, this adrenaline of the immediate response, it eventually hardens into a permanent culture.
Oh, I see. It becomes a habit.
Exactly. The organization becomes neurologically addicted to the adrenaline of responding to crises, to the point where they literally cannot imagine slowing down to evaluate.
Because I guess slowing down starts to feel like a betrayal of the cause. If the house is on fire, you don't sit down to draw a blueprint of a better hose, you just throw water.
Right. But if you treat every single day like the house is on fire, you never actually build a fire department.
That's a profound way to put it. You never build the infrastructure.
And if we look at the psychology behind this, busyness begins to act as a moral shield. This is where it gets really interesting.
A moral shield? How so?
Well, if everyone in the room is working themselves to the bone, no one has to feel like a failure. The hard work itself, the sheer volume of hours logged, becomes the justification for the program's existence.
So because everyone is trying so incredibly hard, it feels almost offensive to raise your hand in a meeting and ask, wait, is any of this actually working?
Precisely. If you question the efficacy of the soup kitchen, people look at you like you hate the hungry.
Wow, yes! That is such a real dynamic.
The text makes a crucial distinction here that we need to internalize. Evaluating impact is not a criticism of compassion. It is a diagnosis of dysfunction.
Evaluating impact is a diagnosis of dysfunction. I love that. That moral shield is so dense and it's so easy to hide behind. I want you, the listener, to really examine your own life for a second.
Yeah, apply this to your own world.
Think about the projects you're juggling, the boards you sit on, or the teams you lead at work. Where are you using busyness as a substitute for obedience to your actual goal?
Where is the friction of your frantic schedule serving as a substitute for true effectiveness?
Exactly. Are you measuring your faithfulness to a project by how much you do rather than what you're doing is actually accomplishing? It's a tough mirror to look into.
It is, because it forces you to separate your ego from your output. And it argues that sincerity, left without discernment, simply cannot substitute for strategy.
Sincerity is not strategy. You can have the best heart in the world, but good hearts can, and very frequently do, produce incredibly weak, fragile systems.
Sincerity does not automatically generate competence, unfortunately.
Right, so if this holy exhaustion is the overarching disease affecting these organizations, we need to understand exactly how it spreads. How does a group of smart, well-meaning people end up sprinting on that dark treadmill?
Well, the source material doesn't just leave us with the abstract concept. It actually provides a highly detailed diagnosis of the specific symptoms.
And rather than just reading a list, let's explore how these symptoms weave together in the real world. Let's look at the life cycle of a typical organization falling into this trap.
That's the best way to approach it, because these dysfunctions rarely happen in isolation. They cascade. Usually the first symptom is what we call overprogramming.
Okay, overprogramming. Let's imagine a well-meaning community leader. We'll call her Sarah.
Great, let's use Sarah.
So Sarah starts a weekend mentoring program for at-risk youth. It's highly focused and it's effective. But because she is a person of action, people start bringing her other burdens.
Of course they do. Success breeds more requests.
Right. Someone says, hey, these kids also need winter coats. So Sarah starts a coat drive. Then someone says their parents need resume building. So she launches a Tuesday night career clinic.
And then there's a local natural disaster, so she organizes a relief fund.
Yes. Every single new burden, every compelling human story becomes a brand new, fully fledged initiative.
And that is overprogramming in a nutshell. Because they lack a rigid strategy, they start confusing visibility with vitality. Doing more always feels safer than choosing better.
So Sarah's organization is now doing 5 things instead of 1. And the tragedy is that this creates a massive illusion of abundance.
You look at the calendar in the newsletter and it's packed. But quietly beneath the surface, all her effectiveness is being diluted.
Right. She's no longer a visionary leader mentoring youth. The text says leaders in this spot become, what was the phrase? Administrators of noise.
Yes, administrators of noise. She is just managing the logistics of 5 different under-resourced programs.
I have been in that exact position. You spend your entire week just answering emails about, who has the keys to the building and whose budget the pizza is coming out of.
And you haven't actually spoken to a kid in a month.
Exactly. And because Sarah has overprogrammed, the organization naturally hits the second symptom, fragmentation.
Fragmentation is the unavoidable structural consequence of overprogramming. Now you have the coat drive team, the mentoring team, the career clinic team.
All operating under the same umbrella. But if you stop any volunteer in the hallway and ask, what are we actually responsible for as a whole, they can't answer you.
No one is accountable for the overarching mission. Everyone is just siloed into their passionate little corner.
Which leads to a bizarre psychological phenomenon. Everyone is exhausted. But if you ask, who actually owns the outcome of the career clinic? Everyone points to someone else.
That's the third symptom, unclear ownership.
Yeah.
It's the classic diffusion of responsibility applied to organizational leadership. When everyone owns a ministry, nobody owns it.
The diffusion of responsibility is fatal to impact. Without undeniable ownership, decisions just get deferred.
Or they become highly emotional or intensely political.
Right. Let's say that Tuesday night career clinic is failing. No one is showing up. But because there's no clear owner, no one has the authority to step in and say, we're shutting this down.
Or conversely, no one has the courage to ask if it's still serving its purpose because they don't want to hurt the feelings of the 3 volunteers who run it.
In an environment with unclear ownership, it is usually the loudest, most emotionally volatile voice that wins the debate, not the wisest or most strategic one.
Spot on.
Yeah.
And because you're dealing with all that noise, the silos, and the lack of ownership, your planning horizon basically shrinks to 0. This brings us to the 4th symptom, reactive planning.
You are perpetually living behind the 8 ball. You aren't building from a coherent, proactive 5-year plan at all.
No, the organization operates entirely at the mercy of whatever is most emotional or urgent in that specific Tuesday afternoon staff meeting.
A new crisis happens in the news, or a charismatic speaker comes to town, and the whole organization violently pivots to react to it.
It's leadership by whiplash.
Yeah.
They never dictate the terms of their engagement with the world. The world dictates the terms to them.
Okay, I want to pause right here because this brings up a massive tension, and I genuinely want to push back on this.
Let's hear it.
I struggle with this deeply. If we are talking about missions, charities, and community groups, we are talking about human beings in pain.
Right, yes, real suffering.
So if a nonprofit tells me they're cutting a soup kitchen because it's not strategic, or ignoring a family whose house burned down because it's not in their proactive 5-year plan, my visceral reaction is that they've lost their humanity.
It feels cold.
It feels incredibly cold. Isn't responding to emotional stories of need exactly what compassion is? How do we apply these corporate management principles to human suffering without becoming corporate robots ourselves?
What's fascinating here is how the source material anticipates that exact fear. It is the most common objection to strategic pruning. We have this deep cultural assumption that strategy is cold and emotion is warm.
That's exactly how it feels.
But there is a brilliant, necessary distinction drawn here between sentimentality and compassion. We treat them as synonyms, but they are practically opposites when it comes to long-term impact.
Wait, opposites. Break that down for me. How are sentimentality and compassion opposites?
Well, compassion, true, deep compassion, asks the hardest possible question: what will truly help this situation in the long run? Sentimentality, on the other hand, asks, what makes us feel right in this moment?
Oh.
Right. Compassion is willing to be firm. It's willing to say no to a quick fix. It's willing to restructure things, endure criticism, and suffer short-term misunderstanding for the sake of actual long-term fruitfulness.
And sentimentality.
Sentimentality avoids all of those hard decisions entirely because hard decisions create interpersonal discomfort. Sentimentality will keep a tired, ineffective program alive just because people love the nostalgic memory of what it once was.
Even if the people it's supposed to be helping remain trapped in poverty.
Exactly. It confuses an emotional attachment with actual rigorous discernment.
That is a staggering distinction. Compassion genuinely wants to solve the underlying problem, even if the process is painful or unglamorous.
While sentimentality just wants to feel good about the act of trying to solve the problem.
So sentimentality is actually, in a bizarre way, fundamentally selfish. It's about the giver's emotional state, not the receiver's reality.
Precisely. And that's our fifth symptom. Sentimental decision-making. When an organization runs on sentimentality, these dysfunctions accumulate gradually.
This source gives a great visual for this. It says they accumulate like dust in a room that is never cleaned because the people inside are too busy rearranging the furniture.
You're constantly moving the chairs around, launching a new committee to oversee the old committee, rebranding an event.
Changing the logo. But the systemic dust just keeps piling up, choking the actual life out of the mission. And what we have to remember is that this accumulation of dust usually starts with a genuinely beautiful emotion.
It starts with a real burden to help, but a burden without a system leads straight to chaos.
So let's look exactly at how that happens. The material dives deep into the hidden inefficiencies that this chaos creates and the ultimate trap of relying solely on emotion to run an organization.
There is an incredible assertion made here. Emotional urgency is a gift, but it is a poor architect. Emotion is an ignition, not infrastructure.
Ignition, not infrastructure. I love that phrasing so much. You definitely need the ignition. Without the emotional spark, nothing would ever begin. Apathy is the enemy of action.
Right, but you cannot build a house out of sparks.
Yeah.
Emotion can light the fire, but it absolutely cannot keep the fire directed or sustain it through a cold winter.
A project built solely on emotional urgency will surge when there's a disaster. But the moment that emotional charge naturally fades, which it biologically always does, the momentum collapses entirely.
Because human beings cannot sustain a state of high emotional alarm indefinitely. Our nervous systems just aren't built for it.
So if your organization relies on keeping everyone in a state of high alarm to get things done, you will inevitably breed burnout and cynicism.
And the text provides a fascinating case study to illustrate this. They call it a case study in diffused good intentions. Let's look at a hypothetical, sincere congregation of people.
Okay, let's build out this scenario. Imagine a community group with about 500 highly engaged members. Because they are driven by sentimentality, they decide to support 4 different local causes.
Let's say a homeless shelter, a literacy program, an after-school sports league, and a women's clinic.
Great. Then they add 3 global partners in 3 completely different countries. They also decide to do 2 annual short-term travel trips to help those global partners.
And they have an ongoing disaster relief fund.
Right. And a weekly benevolence ministry to hand out cash. And a massive monthly prayer gathering. And, just to round it out, a special emphasis on youth leadership.
On a brochure, that sounds absolutely incredible. They are changing the world on every front. From the outside, looking at their annual report, it looks wildly successful.
But we have to look at the fallout of this exact scenario after 3 to 5 years. Because there is no unifying strategy, the results are deeply troubling.
Let's look at the local causes. They get sporadic attention. The literacy program might get a check in March, and the sports league gets some volunteers in September.
But there is no sustained long-term partnership that actually moves the needle on local education.
And the global partners. They probably get their financial checks mailed to them, which is helpful, but there is zero relational depth. The group in America isn't actually understanding the systemic issues in the global partners' country.
They're just acting as an ATM. And those annual short-term trips, they generate a massive ton of spiritual excitement and Instagram photos for the people who go.
But there are absolutely no follow-up structures to channel that excitement when they return. So the volunteers come home, ride a high for 2 weeks, and then crash back into normal life.
Completely unchanged in the long term. And the youth they're emphasizing, they graduate into a scattered, disorganized system that immediately drops the ball on their development.
A ministry portfolio like this becomes, as the text explicitly warns, too broad to deepen and too fragmented to measure.
Nobody feels like a failure because everyone is running around trying so hard, but the impact is totally diffused into the atmosphere. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Because the impact is diffused, the organization starts to suffer from hidden inefficiencies.
Right, these aren't the kind of inefficiencies that show up on an accountant's audit. Many of these ministries don't look broken from the outside because the waste is internal. It's human waste.
Let's explore these specific categories of hidden inefficiency, starting with duplication. This is when you literally have 2 teams doing the exact same work without even knowing it.
Because they're so siloed. You might have the youth group running a canned food drive for Thanksgiving and the women's ministry running a separate grocery outreach in the exact same neighborhood for the same holiday.
Exactly, because they are fragmented. They don't combine their purchasing power, they don't combine their volunteer
And they
pools.
probably annoy the local neighborhood by knocking on the same doors twice. Neither group receives enough resources to establish lasting relational depth.
It feels very generous to the people doing it, but it spreads the organization's limited resources incredibly thin.
And then you have overlap. This is insidious. This is when different initiatives within the same organization, unintentionally but aggressively, compete against each other for the exact same limited resources.
They're fighting for the same volunteers, the same donor dollars, and the same calendar space.
The youth pastor is begging for money for a summer camp on the same Sunday. The global missions director is begging for money for a well in Africa. It creates immense fatigue in the congregation.
The fatigue is the key indicator here. People sitting in the audience don't know which initiative is the actual priority of the leadership, so they end up giving superficially to all of them and deeply to none of them.
As is often noted, this overlap isn't always visible in the budget spreadsheet. It is visible in the sheer exhaustion of the people. You're cannibalizing your own base of support.
Which leads perfectly into the third hidden inefficiency, and this one really hits hard. Underused volunteers.
Oh, this one is so common. Organizations often assume they are suffering from a shortage of laborers when the deeper hidden problem is simply massive misalignment.
We take incredible human capital and we deploy it entirely wrong. Misalignment is a tragic waste of human potential.
Think about how this happens in practice. You have a volunteer who is a highly skilled, incredibly analytical logistics manager in their day job. They know how to build supply chains.
But because the organization only values frontline ministry, they force this analytical administrator into a deeply relational, highly empathetic caregiving role, maybe counseling troubled teens.
And the volunteer feels awkward, ineffective, and eventually quits. Meanwhile, you take your most compassionate, empathetic, tender-hearted caregiver.
And because there is a vacancy on the planning committee, you bury them in logistical spreadsheets and event planning where they slowly wither away.
You never consult your strategic thinkers for the big picture, and you never let your caregivers just care. The result is what the material perfectly describes as frustration disguised as participation.
Everyone is participating, but everyone is secretly frustrated because they are operating outside of their design.
I want to ask you, the listener, to evaluate your own teams right now in whatever capacity you lead. Are you constantly complaining about a shortage of help?
Are you always desperate for more volunteers, more hands on deck?
Is it possible you actually have enough people, but you are dealing with profound misalignment? Are you burying your best people in the wrong roles because you lack a clear, objective system to deploy them properly?
It is a vital question for any leader to ask. Because if human emotion and good intentions and even basic standard operating procedures aren't enough to guide us out of this misalignment, what is the standard?
How do we find true north?
The source material provides a fascinating pivot at this juncture. It moves from diagnosing the organizational dysfunction to looking at historical and biblical blueprints for getting this right.
Right, because for the original audience of this text, the ultimate model for mission and impact isn't a modern corporate CEO like Steve Jobs, it's the founders of their faith.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the material makes a profound paradigm-shifting observation. It points out that Jesus never confused need with assignment.
Need versus assignment. That is powerful. I want to really sit with that. Need versus assignment.
It is revolutionary when you apply it to ministry, or really any service-oriented work. Think about the historical context of the first century. The ancient world was a place of endless, unimaginable need.
No modern medicine, no social safety nets, widespread famine.
Oppressive Roman occupation, extreme poverty. The needs around a figure like Jesus were literally infinite. The sick crowded him constantly. The broken pursued him from town to town.
The demand for his time, his energy, and his healing was absolute and unyielding. Yet, if you read the accounts, he did not meet every need in every place.
That is the part that makes us uncomfortable. He frequently withdrew. He literally got in a boat and rowed away from desperate crowds to go pray by himself.
He refused to be ruled by the tyranny of endless demand.
He operated from a place of crystal clear, predetermined purpose, not from a place of panic or constant reactivity to the nearest crisis. He knew what his specific assignment was.
And he did not allow the generalized presence of suffering to dictate his schedule. So what does this all mean for the modern leader?
Well, it changes everything about how you filter requests.
Because, I mean, it sounds great in theory, but practically, how do you look at a desperate need, a genuinely heartbreaking situation right in front of you, like a family facing eviction, and say, no?
How do you sleep at night? The material addresses that deep moral tension directly. It explains that a constant knee-jerk yes to every single crisis is not the same thing as an obedient, strategic yes.
The organization is not called to do everything possible.
It is called to do what it has been entrusted and equipped to do, and to do it with absolute faithfulness and clarity. Some requests for help are very real. They are very heartbreaking.
But they're simply not relevant to the organization's specific calling, their geographical focus, or their current capacity. Saying yes to a good opportunity that isn't aligned with your mission is actually a trap.
It is, because if you say yes to the thing you aren't equipped to handle, you inevitably siphon resources away from the thing you are uniquely positioned to solve.
If an organization cannot discern the difference between a general need and their specific assignment, they will become overextended, overstimulated, and ultimately underfruitful.
They will be a mile wide and an inch deep. Jesus never operated from random, spontaneous compassion that lacked direction. His actions were tied to a redemptive obedience.
And we see the exact same pattern with the Apostle Paul in the New Testament. Paul is a fascinating case study in organizational scaling, actually.
He really is. He was highly strategic. He didn't just wander aimlessly hoping to do good. He traveled to key metropolitan centers with intention.
He appointed specific leaders, he delegated authority, he wrote letters to review their progress, he corrected their course when they drifted.
He wasn't just reacting to the nearest problem. He was intentionally building systems, local churches, that could endure long beyond his own emotional energy and physical presence.
He was building infrastructure, not just sparking ignitions. And to explain this concept of deep, enduring impact, the text uses a beautiful, very grounded, and very ancient illustrative metaphor.
It brings in agriculture. That's about fruitfulness.
Now, the Bible frequently uses the metaphor of the vine and the branches, but the text asks us to really think about what growing fruit actually entails for a farmer.
Agriculture is the perfect metaphor because fruit is never instant. It is the exact opposite of a quick emotional surge or a viral social media campaign.
Fruit requires time. It requires immense hidden work down in the soil where no one can see it.
It requires patient cultivation, an understanding of the seasons, and a deep dependence on the right conditions. A farmer doesn't just run out into a dirt field, throw seeds randomly into the wind in every direction, and then celebrate all that motion.
Right, like, look how many seeds I threw, look how tired my arm is, I'm sweating so much, I must be the greatest farmer in the county.
Exactly. No wise farmer says, "We planted a lot of seeds, therefore we succeeded." The farmer's focus is entirely on the yield, the harvest.
They measure the weather patterns, they test the soil chemistry, they monitor the timing, they look out for pests, they build irrigation systems.
They are constantly analytically evaluating the system to ensure the seed can actually take root and grow. As the text powerfully states, the Lord gives growth, yes, but he does not bless negligence as if it were faith.
He does not bless negligence as if it were faith. That line is an absolute gut punch.
It really is.
You can't just be negligent with your strategy, throw a bunch of money and exhausted volunteers at a problem, and assume your good intentions will magically prompt the universe to create a harvest.
Faith is not an excuse for bad management.
But to get that kind of healthy harvest, a farmer has to do something that feels completely counterintuitive and honestly incredibly painful. They have to cut away the living branches that aren't producing.
Which brings us to what I think is the hardest but most vital part of the source material, the process of pruning. Pruning is where organizational theory meets agonizing human reality.
The material argues that a healthy organization must conduct a rigorous, unflinching inventory of its activities. You have to take a hard look at the tree.
And it lays out a highly specific process for this. You have to list every single activity your organization does in plain, non-spiritualized, non-jargon language.
You can't hide behind lofty, ambiguous mission statements like, we empower the community.
No. What are you actually doing? You are running a bake sale. You are hosting a Tuesday night seminar. Write it down.
Once you list them all out, you must categorize every single activity into one of three buckets: strategic, symbolic, or uncertain. I love frameworks like this. Let's really break those buckets down so people can visualize them.
First, the strategic bucket. A strategic activity is one that clearly, undeniably advances your core mission goals. It has a definite owner, meaning there is a specific person whose name is next to it, and if it fails, they are the one you talk to.
And crucially, it has measurable outcomes. You can empirically prove it is working. The youth are actually graduating. The homeless are actually finding housing.
Then you have the symbolic bucket. This is where it gets tricky. A symbolic activity is one that expresses a deeply held value, or maintains a cherished organizational identity, or keeps a beloved tradition alive.
However, its actual measurable impact on the external mission is entirely unclear or non-existent.
Right. It is done because it means something to the people doing it,
Yeah.
not necessarily because it changes anything for the people receiving it. It's an internal cultural touchstone.
And finally, the uncertain bucket.
These are the activities where you look at them and you just aren't sure. They might matter. There might be a kernel of real impact buried in there somewhere.
But there currently isn't enough evidence, clarity, or organizational structure to justify the massive amount of resources they're consuming in their current form.
Exactly. When I was reading this section, it instantly made me think of the psychology of cleaning out a closet.
Oh, that's a brilliant comparison. You know that specific feeling of dread and nostalgia? You pull every single piece of clothing out and throw it on the bed.
But strategic clothes are the ones you wear every week to work. They fit you right now, they look good, they serve a clear, functional purpose in your current life.
But then you encounter the symbolic clothes. That expensive dress or that beautifully tailored suit you wore to a phenomenal New Year's Eve party 5 years ago.
You hold on to it tightly because of the memory attached to it, because of how it made you feel when you wore it.
But let's be radically honest. It doesn't fit you today. Your lifestyle has changed, and you are never, ever going to wear it again. It is just taking up valuable real estate.
You can't keep it just for the nostalgia if you want a functional closet that helps you get dressed in the morning.
That is a highly accurate analogy, and it touches on exactly why pruning an organization is so profoundly difficult. The material doesn't shy away from this. It acknowledges the deep emotional toll of this process.
Pruning introduces real, palpable grief. When you cut a program, say you shut down that Tuesday night career clinic we talked about earlier, people aren't just losing an activity on their calendar.
They're losing memories. They're losing the specific relationships that were built during that activity. They're losing a sense of continuity and comfort.
The text insists that a good leader must honor this pain, but they absolutely cannot allow that pain to control the future of the organization.
Because if you don't cut the dead wood, or even the living wood that is draining the sap without producing fruit, the whole tree suffers. The healthy branches are starved of nutrients because you are keeping the dying branches on life support.
The text states it plainly and forcefully. A church that cannot prune cannot mature. Sometimes, the absolute most faithful, loving, and strategic thing you can do is to stop doing a good thing poorly.
So that you can free up those precious resources, time, money, and volunteer energy to do a better thing well. I want to challenge you, the listener, right now.
Think about your calendar, your business, your volunteer commitments, or even your own personal habits.
What is the one project or commitment you are holding on to purely out of nostalgia? What are you fiercely protecting, maybe even arguing about in meetings because it is emotionally familiar to you, not because it is strategically effective for the people you are actually trying to help?
What is your symbolic party outfit taking up space in your closet? It is a difficult question that forces true strategic thinking. It forces you to confront your own biases.
The text provides a list of diagnostic questions to force this exact kind of clarity in team meetings. Questions like, what would happen practically if we were forced to reduce our missions portfolio by 30% tomorrow? What would we keep and why?
Or, are you willing to disappoint people in the short term in order to be faithful to the mission in the long term?
So let's say a leader has done the hard work. You've diagnosed the dysfunction. You understand the fundamental difference between a general need and your specific assignment.
You have bravely categorized your organizational closet and pruned the excess, even though it hurt and people complained.
How do you manage the day-to-day operations of what remains so that you don't end up right back in the exact same chaotic mess a year later? This is where the source material took a turn that filled me with sheer delight.
Well, the practical steps at the end.
Yes. The end of the text is incredibly granularly tactical. It moves out of philosophy and reads almost like a masterclass in personal productivity applied to team leadership. It is all about how the initial emotional burden must be translated into daily stewardship.
This raises an important question. How do you actually do that translation? How do you move from a feeling in your heart to a system on your desk?
The text moves from theological and organizational theory into highly actionable, almost aggressively practical steps. It starts with the concept very familiar to anyone who follows productivity experts: capture every open loop.
Yes. It's like getting things done for missions and charities.
Exactly. We are talking about the Zeigarnik effect in psychology, the tendency of the human brain to remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks better than completed ones.
Unfinished tasks loop in our minds and drain our cognitive bandwidth. The text instructs leaders to forcefully write down every single missions-related task, idea, burden, unresolved issue, and pending email.
You have to externalize it. As long as it is floating in your head as a vague anxiety, it is draining your leadership energy and creating mental clutter. You have to get it all onto paper or into a digital system to see the actual physical weight of what you're carrying.
And once it's on paper, you can't just leave it as a vague aspiration. That doesn't solve the problem. The next step the text outlines is to define the next physical action.
This is huge. You have to aggressively ban vague language from your to-do lists and your meeting agendas.
Right. The text uses a great example to illustrate this. If you write down clarify mission strategy on your whiteboard, that is completely useless. It is not an action. It is a wish. It is a state of being.
You cannot physically do a clarification. Your brain doesn't know what to do with that, so you will procrastinate on it forever.
You have to translate that vague desire into a visible physical step. Something like schedule a 60-minute planning meeting with the core team for next Tuesday at 2 p.m. That is an action. You can execute that in one sitting.
It forces you to figure out what the actual immediate roadblock is. The text also brings in the classic 2-minute rule. If a task related to your mission takes less than 2 minutes, sending a quick confirmation email, filing a receipt from the hardware store, forwarding an update to a donor, do it immediately.
Do not put it on a list. Do not schedule it for later. Just do it. It prevents all those tiny, insignificant administrative pebbles from piling up and turning into a hidden boulder that crushes your momentum at the end of the week.
And perhaps the most crucial systemic habit the text introduces is the ironclad rule to review before you commit. Before you say yes to any new initiative, any new plea for help, any new brilliant idea from a board member, you must pause and ask what it will cost.
And we aren't just talking about financial costs. What will it cost in time? What will it cost in cognitive attention? Who will actually own it and drive it forward?
And most importantly, what will we have to stop doing or reduce in order to accommodate this new yes without burning our people out? If those answers are unclear, the text says you must not commit yet.
It is about building a wall to protect the focus you just fought so hard to gain.
Now, out of all these practical exercises at the end of the text, my absolute favorite, the one that really sings, is the stop doing exercise. The instructions are so incredibly specific and so wise. It tells you to pick just one program to redesign or discontinue.
Just one, not 10. Not a massive tear it all down, burn the ships restructuring that terrifies the entire staff.
Yeah.
Just one brave act of pruning.
The psychological wisdom there is profound. Ministries, nonprofits, and people in general often try to become healthier by attempting a dramatic overnight overhaul. Starting Monday, everything is different.
That usually just creates massive organizational whiplash, deep resentment, and a total loss of trust. But by focusing on one clear, decisive, well-communicated act of pruning, you prove to the organization that change is actually possible.
You prove that the world won't end if a symbolic program closes its doors, and you begin to slowly, methodically build a culture that values actual impact over comfortable sentimentality.
It builds the muscle memory for making hard choices. It proves you can survive the friction. The text leaves us with a brilliant thought experiment regarding these choices. It asks us to project our current habits into the future. Imagine 2 different futures for an organization, say 5 years down the road.
Yes, the long-term impact scenario. It asks you to deeply imagine future A. In future A, the organization stayed incredibly busy. They never clarified their priorities. They let emotional urgency and guilt drive every single decision. They said yes to everything.
In 5 years, what does volunteer health look like? They are deeply burned out and cynical. What does partnership quality look like? Shallow, transactional, and dependent. What does leadership confidence look like? Foggy, exhausted, and reactive.
And then there is future B.
Future B is the result of the hard work. The organization became intensely focused. They pruned wisely, even when it hurt. They measured their fruit instead of their sweat.
In 5 years, volunteers are energized because they're operating in their actual gifts, not just plugging holes. Partnerships are durable, respectful, and mutually transformative. Leaders are confident because they have clear, objective metrics for success.
The text asks the reader to look at those two distinctly different futures and honestly identify which one their current daily decisions are moving them toward.
That is the ultimate stewardship question, isn't it? What future are you building with your daily habits? As we wrap up this deep dive, the absolute necessity of aligning our compassion with real, rigorous systems has never been clearer to me.
We've seen that emotional urgency is a fantastic ignition. It gets the car out of the driveway. But a system, a framework of clear ownership, strategic planning, and regular unflinching evaluation, that is the steering wheel.
That is what actually gets you to the destination. And evaluating your work for fruitfulness isn't some cold corporate bureaucracy invading a sacred, compassionate space. It is, as the text argues so beautifully, a profound spiritual responsibility.
It truly is the critical difference between merely feeling burdened for the brokenness of the world and actually changing it.
Exactly. Now, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought today. It is inspired by everything we've unpacked from this incredible source material, but it requires looking just a bit beyond the organizational chart and straight into the dark corners of our own psychology.
Oh, here we go.
The text challenges us to bravely prune the programs and the events that are driven by holy exhaustion. But what if the hardest thing we have to prune isn't a program at all? What if the absolute hardest thing to cut away is our own ego?
That's a huge question.
What if we have to let go of the deep, secret, intoxicating validation we get from having people look at us and say, wow, you are so busy, you're doing so much for the community, I don't know how you do it. If you weren't allowed to use busyness as your identity anymore, who would you be?
That is the question that lingers long after the calendar is finally cleared.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Whether you are leading a massive global organization, running a weekend volunteer team, or just trying to manage your own personal capacity to help others, we hope you take these tools, ask the hard questions, and start building for impact rather than just motion. We will see you next time.